I'm joined by a great panel here. I have with me Daniel Hawkins, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Avail Medsystems, Sid Satish, who is the Vice President of Digital Innovation for Surgical Technologies from Stryker. I have Nadine. I knew I was going to screw it up.
Don't worry, I said it's okay, it gets butchered many times. Who's
the CEO of Proximie, and Todd Newsom, who's the CEO of ActivSurgical. And they each bring a very unique perspective to the issue of technology in the OR today. To set the stage a little bit, I have been in the med device connected business for well over 40 years, so I'm probably the elder statesman on the panel and I've seen a lot of technology. I'll say this, technology used to be the hurdle. I think we're less of the problem now, and you're going to hear a lot about that today. S3 Connected Health is a contract design and services company headquartered in Dublin, and we do connected devices around the world as a support service. Okay, having said that, so what's been happening in Medtech as we've evolved over the years? 40 years ago, I was on an aircraft carrier beaming images to Bethesda and to Walter Reed. It was the early days of telemedicine, teleradiology. We had standalone devices that were islands of information, basically, encapsulated somewhere and not going anywhere and being used for anything other than directly dealing with the patient. We started connecting them, and that connection sometimes was an RS-232 port or a parallel port or evolving forward a flash drive where we'd physically go out and capture data from that. Moving forward, we took advantage of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and the internet and started connecting devices. That started to give us an ability to do therapy improvement. As we started to understand not only what the equipment was doing, we understood how it was being used, and we could look at the impact on the patient. And then as we move along to therapy improvement and ultimately connected health, which the holy grail that we're all chasing perhaps is when every device everywhere is connected at any time and providing qualitative and good information about me as an individual, whether it's in the hospital, in the operating room, or at home. So that's the journey that we've been on over the last 30 years or so. And today we're going to talk about moving that technology into the OR. And my colleagues on the panel here have very interesting takes on what to do here. You'll see that we're looking at improving procedures, quality, and effectiveness within the hospital. We're getting real-time information. We're able to pull that real-time information from experts from the outside, and we can look at incorporating AR and virtual reality into the scenario. And finally, we'll have better information, precision, and skill enhancements. So with that as an introduction here, I'm going to ask each of the panelists now to introduce themselves and give us a minute or two about their company, their background, and what they're doing. And then we're going to have a discussion about the area. We're going to leave about 10 minutes for questions at the end, so jot down your questions and we'll call on you at the end. And I'll ask you to stand up. We don't have another mic in here, so please just stand up and shout your question out, and I'll repeat it as I can. So we'll start over on my right with Sid. Go ahead, a little introduction, please, and tell us about your company.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Great to be here with all of you. Sid Satish with Stryker today. 9 months ago, I was not with Stryker. I was with a small Silicon Valley-based AI company, and we're now part of Stryker. Stryker probably needs no introduction to many of you. It's a leading medical technology company, 40,000 employees, 22 business units. And we are operating across the continuum of care. I'd actually venture to say in the context of today, Stryker is a connected health company. And so I'm very much looking forward to speaking with all of you about AI and connectivity.
Daniel, go ahead.
My name is Daniel Hawkins. I'm founder and CEO of Avail Medsystems. I've been in the medtech space about 30 years. Started in angioplasty and then was one of the first half dozen at ActivSurgical. And that's where I got the vision for what is now Avail Medsystems in conversations with Fred Mull back in those early days about the opportunity to bring expertise into the operating room, but more importantly, to be able to leverage hardware and software capability in the operating room in a consistent fashion to enable a range of artificial intelligence, computer vision, and machine learning capabilities to have eyes, ears, high-powered computing, and a connection to the cloud in the operating room. At Avail, that's what we've built, not only for person-to-person connectivity, but to enable that kind of capability from outside the operating room to interface inside the operating room. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Nadine, would you introduce yourself and your company?
Hi everyone, my name is Nadine Hashosh-Haram. I'm a reconstructive plastic surgeon and I'm the founder and CEO of Proximie. As a practicing surgeon for over 10 years, I was incredibly frustrated with the status quo. I think we'd all agree there's still a high amount of variation in surgical care. There's still a lot of opacity in terms of how we deliver surgical care and how we codify the delivery of connected surgical care across the continuum. And I got really frustrated seeing that kind of variability firsthand. And so I decided to think about how do we shift these pretty analog environment, that kind of last bastion of analog within healthcare, which is surgery, to a more connected, digitally enabled, data-driven continuum. And that's where Proximie is. We're a software company. We are what you would call almost the OS of the operating room. We take and connect, collect, and activate devices, interactions between individuals, and the data within those environments to really start to optimize and digitize surgery. We really think collectively about the kind of pre, the intra, and the post, and we pull data sets from all of those environments into a connected continuum. And to do that, you really have to be able to what Daniel said as well, is be able to connect the outside of the operating room, inside the operating room as well. So we enable telementoring and telecollaboration. We enable the aggregation of multiple data sets within that environment. And then we activate that data in a meaningful way. And we collaborate with many partners, both strategics and hospitals, in order to do that. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Todd, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. It's very hard to follow. It's a beautiful international accent, a New Jersey accent. So I'll do the best I can. My name is Todd Houston. I've been in Medtech a little over 30 years, not in the startup role that I'm in now. I spent about 13 years at Boston Scientific. Last role I ran the U.S. in the neurovascular business. And I went to Smith & Nephew. My last role, I was lucky enough to be the president of all of orthopedics. And then I went to Olympus, where I was the president of all the medical divisions there. So had a great experience and had these wonderful $5 or $6 billion P&Ls, and came over to the startup world, and I just have an L right now. So ActivSurgical is actually our founding technology is Dr. Peter Kim, a pediatric surgeon who was at Children's National Medical Center. In 2016, he completed the world's first fully autonomous robotic procedure in soft tissue. And became a company from there through the venture capital world. And I came on in January of 2019 with no intention of building a robot. I mean, there's enough good robotics out there. But basically the science and the work that we do at ActivSurgical is taking technology, sensing technology, computer vision, and with small device attaching it to scopes and robotics. And we allow our surgeons to see things that aren't visible in the operating room without any data, whether it's perfusion or pre-critical structures or what have you. I kind of look at it as a 16-year-old getting his or her driver's license today versus years past. They have a rear view camera in the car. They have side view, little orange light on the side view mirror. They have a seat that might vibrate if they're texting when they shouldn't be, when they're driving. And that's information for the driver. And that's what we want to make sure that we bring to patients around the world. They should all have the same confidence that no matter how much experience the surgeon has, they have the same confidence that the surgeon has great information on every surgery. So through the work that we do, we bring it to AI, and we'll talk more about that. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, thanks. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper now with that as a little bit of background. So we talked when we met about the big benefits of moving information into and out of the OR. So let's touch on that. I'd like to ask each of you to highlight one of the key points you see that are the benefits of really this technology moving in. Nadine, we'll start with you.
I think there's, as a kind of practicing clinician, what we tend to see is there's a lot of kind of hype outside talking about data and AI, and a lot of these sort of big words that get sort of thrown around. And ultimately, as clinical teams on the front line, what we really care about is how is that going to really translate and activate what we do in practice? How is it going to improve the quality of care? How does it improve access? How does it, ultimately make sure that every patient is getting the best care the first time, every time? And so with that in mind, it was always kind of value and impact was always front of mind for us as we were building out the software stack, and recognizing that we needed to build something fit for now, but fit for the future as well. And the reason being is that if I was to walk into the OR next door to one of my colleagues and said, I want to build this future view for you of what the future of the operating will look like, they'd be interested, but they'd probably say, look, I I gotta get through my list. This is really exciting. I'll hear about it at a conference when I head to it in like 6 months' time. It doesn't impact the day-to-day practice of what people are doing. And so we really needed to find that kind of immediate digital wedge that gets you in and gets people excited about how we're shifting and changing the paradigm of surgery. But also longer term, how do you continue to build on that data and that knowledge and that learning that I think everyone on this panel cares about to really then activate some long-term value as well. And so we really needed to find those key pain points that would enable us to kind of have those wins. And so pain points are often things like being able to get the expertise that you need in the room when you need it, whether that's a rep, a colleague, an expert, and being able to bring that to the fore immediately in an immersive way is critical. And so through our platform, we were able to build that immersive AR experience where you can actually virtually scrub in and be part of that room and see all the different views of what's going on. Those are all data points that we're aggregating: the collaboration, the real-time annotation, the 4 views, the ethnography of what's going on in an operating room is being collected for the future value, but in the immediate term, you're actually creating immediate value. The second bit, of course, is recognizing that data can mean many things to many different people. And so what are we actually trying to solve when we use the word data and data-driven? And who are we trying to unlock value for? And so my counsel has often been to even our engineers is don't try to build point solutions, because what you're really trying to build is a platform that can unlock a complex environment within the OR and value for all those pain points. So within our software stack, not only are we enabling telementoring and telecollaboration, but we're aggregating multiple views and now unlocking value for example, OR efficiency, supply chain, and others. And to give you some real examples, so I'm not just talking about future things, 2 weeks ago we did a month's worth of operating in a day because we were able to crystallize the knowledge of the efficiency and effectiveness of the multiple rooms we were running through the Proximie platform and activate that data immediately back to the anesthesiologists and the surgeons to better understand how to drive effectiveness within that environment. That's an incredible number, a month's worth of operating in a day. For hospitals, that's valuable. For patients, it's phenomenal. For the clinical teams, they feel like they get stuff done. And so it's about continuously looking at what are those pain points that this system and this platform can unlock, and how do you bring that real value at the end of it? And we always bring it back to the patient story. In each of those environments, each of those examples I've just given, there's patients at the end of it. We've enabled life-saving care delivered to people who wouldn't have otherwise had access to it. We've enabled access to secondary expertise that has optimized the delivery of a surgical procedure. We've enabled effectiveness and efficiency that supports the health system to deliver more care to more patients better and faster. And so it's really thinking about these futuristic technology stacks, but flipping on its head and thinking, what value am I trying to create? And how is this going to be something really meaningful and long-lasting for health systems, whether it's here in the US or all around the world?
Thank you. I heard efficiency and bringing in extra skill sets as key elements of that, but a great overview. Daniel, you want to take a shot at that as well? In addition to those, what are some of the avenues that you see that you're bringing to the OR?
Sure. So one of the key elements that Fred and I discussed back in '99 and through my years in a varying startups, most recently a company called Shockwave Medical that I founded in the vascular space, is the need to bring expertise into operating rooms, as Nadine points out. And I think it's really appropriate to describe that there's a lack of expertise in operating rooms at the moment it's needed. Person-to-person communication allows that. That supported with video and audio, that allows that. What we've done at Avail is taken not just a software approach, but a software hardware approach, because we think it's very, very important to provide a network of capability that the outside world can access electronically. So what I'm referring to here is capabilities built in artificial intelligence that need local computing, that need consistent eyes and ears in the operating room, that need a secure internet connection to the cloud. One should be thinking of a network that provides access to an app store of external capability to be brought into the operating room. That's an extraordinarily powerful capability if it can be built. That's what we're building at Avail, deploying hundreds and hundreds of these units across all clinical specialties and sites of service with the vision of enabling all that knowledge that is stored not only clinically, but being enabled through artificial intelligence to watch, to listen, to be able to provide clinical augmentation live during procedures. That should not be limited just to the 5% or so of procedures that are robotic. It should be enabled for the 95% of procedures that are not. So by way of perfect example, an angioplasty has no robotics in it unless you're using a Corindus, perhaps. But there's lots and lots of learning that can be gained through that. You could use artificial intelligence to assess kidney flow. You could use artificial intelligence to assess the residual stenosis. You can't do that if you don't have dedicated hardware in an operating room that is consistent and that those algorithms can be deployed locally using local computing on dedicated hardware. That's the reason why we have built Avail the way we have.
Thank you. So we've got a software approach over here. We've got a hardware and software approach. Sid, I'm going to ask you to build on this a little bit, but probably from your startup, I got acquired a little bit because you took a pretty specific look at a problem in the OR and went and solved that problem. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you approach it and how you see the benefit there?
So the startup that Bill is referring to is called ActivSurgical.
Use the microphone.
Everyone hear me? So the startup that Bill was referring to is called ActivSurgical. We essentially use the iPad in the operating room as an edge device, sort of like Dan was referring to, where all the compute's happening locally. We have cloud infrastructure. But the idea was to actually go back to some of what Nadine, really all of us are trying to look at is, safety, reduction of variability in care, better outcomes. The problem we looked at was really driven by something that's pretty ubiquitous in surgery, and that's bleeding. So since the dawn of medicine, blood loss has been visually estimated by physicians. The nurses, anesthesiologists, and surgeons tend to just sort of argue about what they've lost. They negotiate. Nadine probably doesn't lose much blood at all if I were to be a guessing man. And essentially the number for blood loss is just kind of made up. There's really no way to get it accurately. So we used computer vision, deep learning, machine learning on this mobile device to essentially deliver more standardized reporting of what we now call quantitative blood loss. We started in the main operating rooms. We looked at transfusions as a big area of focus. There's some value propositions around safety, reduction of unnecessary transfusion, or the provision of transfusions that are necessary but don't get delivered because we've underestimated the amount of blood the patient's lost. So we built this app. It took, we thought it would take 6 months. It took about 7 years and 7 FDA clearances, a de novo approval that lasted 3 years long to get there. And Fred and Jay and others were at a front row seat to our journey. And ultimately, we've now deployed, just loads and loads of iPads. So into these delivery rooms and operating rooms, we're running an app locally on these devices. All the compute's happening on an Apple device. And the idea then is to sort of unlock this information stream that was previously not accessible, right? It's the visual data stream of the OR. So we're starting with blood. If you can measure how much blood a patient's lost using AI, you can then sort of predict, well, does someone need a transfusion? You can maybe alert the blood bank much faster than it is typically today, which is a network of phone calls. And then we started to ask the question, well, what else can you do with this sort of platform, right? We've all talked about the App Store concept, and that's what's really exciting looking ahead. So as part of our acquisition by Stryker in 2021, part of the big thesis is how do we start to deploy more of this kind of edge AI into ORs and to sort of continue to mine that visual data feed in the operating room. So a consistent theme here is how do we make care better? I'd argue as one of the earliest AI companies in the space that although it's hard and it's taken a lot of work with FDA to get here, I really think that the AI can start to build these autonomous feedback loops into care where you don't necessarily need to rely on someone's expertise, but you can automate either steps of a robotic procedure or something like a critical piece of information that is then going to drive these protocols that exist within the system.
And we could have a great talk about trying to use iPads and various other things and get them cleared and approved, but we won't go down that path today because I want to talk to Todd. Todd's got I think a unique device too, and what you were looking at, and you look at a specific issue and problem there. So I'll let you finish this question too.
Yeah, I think what we bring is real-time information to the surgeon on the operating room table. The third leading cause of death in the world are preventable medical errors. and 26% of preventable medical errors or preventable surgical errors. Not one of those patients is terminal when they go to the operating room. They're getting their gallbladders removed, they're getting a colorectal procedure, esophagectomy, serious procedures for the patient, but nothing that the patient should be coming back and having readmission of 12 to 15 days, and 15% mortality rate when the patients have an anastomotic leak or what have you. The number one thing that physicians aren't able to always see is real-time blood flow. So today, we rely on a dye called ICG. We inject the dye. It's the gold standard. It's fantastic. We're not competing against a dye or any system that uses a dye. You inject a dye. Wherever there's blood flow, the dye, you'll see green. You'll see fluorescent green. You bring in a system that allows you to do that. If you clamp that in the middle of a case, right where you see the blood flow with fluorescent green, and you stick a clamp on it and stop the blood flow, you look at the screen, it's going to be fluorescent green. So physicians know they have a false positive, and you get real time once when you initially inject. With ActivSite, with the technology, with the press of a button, through multimodal technology and laser speckle technology, hyperspeckle, what have you, plus an algorithm that was built and really put together, plus this little form factor that fits on every scope and robotic system that are out there, so we can take advantage of these wonderful technologies that are in operating rooms. With the press of a button, physicians can see in real time without any dyes, blood flow. You want to clamp it in the middle, the color will change right there. And the colors are different. ICG is all green wherever there's blood. You'll see reds, you'll see oranges, you'll see purples, because the number one cause of an anastomotic leak is inadequate blood flow, not no blood flow, inadequate. We never know what the amount of blood flow is until you can truly see it. From this technology of real-time information, that's when the fun starts, and we feel that we've solved the last mile. And I say that because we're in the operating room because we can help complications over 55 million procedures today with our science. Nothing to do with the AI and machine learning voodoo yet. But as soon as we are in that case, we're collecting de-identified surgical video that's going up to the cloud. It's annotated, ground truth annotation, our machine learning algorithm takes over, and then we're feeding back information such as vein versus artery, critical structure identification, key critical anatomy, whether it's a ureter, whether it's common bile duct, whether it's, like I said, you'll understand whether it's venous or arterial blood flow, plus lymph node, sentinel node, other identifiers that we're going to be able to present to anyone that uses this little device attached to your scope or working with your robot or in other mechanisms that we have. And that information is being fed right back to the operating room because you have this little device on your scope. Just like if you have an Apple Watch on your wrist, you have it because you want it to stay connected. But oh, by the way, if you're wearing it, you can do your EKG, your body mass index, your footsteps. If you're not wearing it, it's on your night table, you don't get any of that. So anyone that's already using this technology is all of a sudden getting real-time information. The way I share it with people in this, to end this is, any football fans out here that ever watch football on TV, you see that yellow line that goes across for first downs. We see that on TV. I want the players to see that. The players don't see that. I want the surgeons to see what's up ahead. Up ahead is key critical structure, identifiers, landmines and landmarks, live in surgery so we can truly make a difference. So we believe we're bringing the first real-time information to the operating room, point of care for the patient.
Okay, much of the focus here has been on real-time enhancements and improvements. I want to keep this moving though, because I promise we'll save some time for questions. So I want to talk about that data. I think everybody hit on the fact that we'll have real-time data, it'll improve surgeries, it'll improve outcomes and that sort of thing. Well, what about that data? Let's talk about that for just a second and where it's going to go after that and what are the possible uses for it in other scenarios. So Daniel, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So there's lots of data opportunities in the operating room. They all start first with, in my view, unless they're de-identified, I should say, at the edge, it starts with legal permissions. I think we need to start with, has the patient been appropriately consented? Is the facility, as an administration, consenting to the dispersion of that data from inside the operating room to outside the operating room? That's a key question. We've had thousands of conversations about this, and the vast, vast majority of them at the facility level are hand up, not interested. That's our data. Now, if you get down to the physician level, they're interested in having an email with a link to a procedure afterwards. That sounds fine. But at the administration level, they don't like that stuff going on. To be able to create a centralized, singular ownership database of audio, video, and other data coming out of operating rooms is not only a challenge, I would submit that it's unrealistic because of the ownership providences that are out there. So starting with that as a baseline, presuming you can pull the data out of the operating room in a de-identified fashion, I'm not going to suppose that I'm the one who's going to describe to everyone out here and whoever's listening online that I know what's going to be done with that data. It's sort of the equivalent of suggesting I know what's going to be done with the next piece of data that's going to show up in the computing room. I have absolutely no idea, because there's a whole army of very, very smart data analysts that are going to be using it. But what I would suggest is the capability of artificial intelligence, of machine learning and computer vision brought into the operating room using cameras like an iPad or in our hardware or other pieces of hardware, allow a capability right at the edge to bring that type of analysis that is meaningful at that exact moment. The notion of transporting out and aggregation, love the idea. I think as a practical matter, it'll be a challenge. But I do think once de-identified, we would be able to do a wide range of outcomes measurement, certainly, but more importantly, real-time capabilities brought into the operating room to measure anatomy and provide the next level of decision-making for a surgeon during a case, because as Todd described, you can maybe look with computer vision or artificial intelligence around a corner that you can't see with the naked eye, that you can't predict is the next thing that's going to happen. I view data aggregation as interesting, but pulling that data then back into the operating room requires that you have capability to do that. We're obviously building that capability as a background network engine, but that's really where the power of that data is. It's to clinically drive decision-making in the moment.
Thank you. Nadine, as a physician, do you have anything you'd like to add to that and focus on that?
But I think what's really important when we talk about data is we have to understand that underlying that is really about building trust. We've seen too many times where that trust has been misused, or I don't know if you and many of you followed what went on across the pond when Google DeepMind came into one of the hospitals, and those kind of things can influence how patients perceive people accessing their data and how hospitals and health systems perceive the access to data. And so it's really, really important as leaders in this field and individuals trying to, anyone on this panel, anyone watching, anyone in the audience, that you're trying to work through how to enable the connection, collection, activation of this data, is that we make sure that we're really putting good processes in place, that we're HIPAA and GDPR compliant, that we're de-identifying the data, that we're being very transparent about what we're trying to do with that data and the meaningful outputs of that data. Because if that trust is lost, it's very hard to earn back again. And I think patients have that they've seen that kind of mistrust build once or twice before, and it's really important as we try to voyage on this journey in surgery and data and bring that surgery and data together in whatever avenue we're all describing, is that we make sure that at the heart of it, it's about building trust, it's about doing the right way, it's about making sure that data is de-identified, it's about being GDPR and HIPAA compliant. I think GDPR, as you know, is more stringent than HIPAA, and making sure that you follow that as well. So those would be my perspectives, kind of with that clinical and patient-focused hat on as well.
Well, I guess as moderator, I get to add an editorial comment. As a patient, I get very interested in that data as well. 3 years ago, I had to have a 7.5-hour brain surgery. I struggled to find the right surgeon with the right skill set and the right capabilities. So as you guys are gathering data and pulling things together as a patient, I'm really interested in knowing how I can utilize that to get better care and to identify that. And I know that's a whole topic we won't go down, but I can't forget the patient as part of that journey as well.
It's absolutely critical, and I agree.
I want to keep us moving a little bit here because we want to save some time. So I'm going to, unless Sid or do you have anything you want to add to the data conversation real quickly? Because I'd like to move on.
The only thing is the data is only as good as the insights that are derived from it. And because data is a bumper sticker, how important it is in medicine. Everyone says that, but no one knows what it means. So at the end of the day, it has to be something that's really needed. Nadine can't be in every surgery around the world. Her information and crowdsourced data with 1,000 of her colleagues can be. And that's the goal. Let's make sure we put on the screens for our surgeons the information that's pertinent from experts around the world, right on the point of care. And that's when data will mean something. So it helps you in the game, not pre-navigation and all the efficiency stuff that you get in the operating room. Those are nice. In the game is when it really counts.
And one of the parts that goes with that is the veracity and trustfulness of the data. You talk about trust, but it's, can I trust the data? So Sid, that's where I'll throw the last data question back to you with the having a trusted medical device or something that you work on hard is repetitiveness and consistency. That's one of the challenges of using a consumer-oriented device in this area.
Yeah.
So.
No, first of all, I concur with Todd. I think, data, I love the comment, data's a bumper sticker. It really only matters if there's a value proposition at the end of it. And there is a lot of merit in aggregating tons and tons of data, but I sort of view that as research, right? There's an awesome paper that came out today using our Mako suite of products at Stryker, and they a series of researchers found that you could predict OR time with a scan and a few pieces of intraoperative data. See, those are awesome insights that you can pick up. You don't necessarily need to open up the data feed of the health system and all the risk and infrastructure that comes with it. So I think there are a lot of folks pushing the envelope just through research. And I'm a big fan of applications that are driven by data, like ours was at Gauss, but with a real end game to it. A very specific view towards what are you trying to predict with that data? What are you trying to do with it? Now let's go enable that. In terms of trust and these consumer grade devices, this is actually a big reason that we chose Apple as our device of choice. Since the iPad literally came out and a month later we were building an app for it. One thing that's been really nice about these devices is, even though we don't sort of control the device itself, is that it's encrypted not only in software but also at the hardware level. And that level of encryption is a really big deal as we think about capturing very sensitive data at the edge, literally at the point of care in a third-party system. And obviously we follow best practices both on the app level, transmission of data, and everything that we do on the cloud. It's probably one of the few instances you'll see like an Apple device talking to a Microsoft server. And everything's very secure. But the piece I'd like to actually bring up about these devices, the reason we really chose a third-party consumer-grade device was twofold, right? The first thing is, the idea that you can put an iPad in the operating room and do something that's medical grade with that device was just incredibly cool, right? And as we started talking to doctors and nurses, there's actually a lot of value in that. We find that our nurses who we work with every day, they really love the idea that the same device they're using to interact in their personal lives and do everything else with work and their personal side is also an interface they're now interacting with in the operating room. So that commonality and that user experience that gets translated over is so key. And that user experience is hard to develop from scratch every single time you have a new application. So that's one of the reasons we picked this device. The other reason we picked this device is that it just gets better and better over time. So our perspective was we really wanted to focus on software. And we wanted to focus on the algorithms, and we were betting on these large consumer, facing companies to be financed by this $1 trillion consumer market to keep getting their devices to improve over time. And that bet certainly paid off. To give you an example, we do sort of 3D image capture with our app. So we're using the infrared sensor to collect the depth feed, and then we're capturing scans of sponges and surgery. Well, that depth sensor didn't really exist on the first version of the iPad. We used a foot pedal to capture these images. It wasn't a very good UX. A few years later, we attached a depth sensor to it in our second-gen product. And then by the time we launched our third-gen product, the depth sensor had been miniaturized and actually stuck into the iPhone. It's called Face ID. You probably use it every day to open your phone. So that kind of bet on where technology is going was something we wanted to make, so that we weren't necessarily pigeonholed into a version of hardware that was going to evolve every, cycle every 5 years.
If I can move us on, because I want to talk about the challenges. We've talked a lot about the tech. We've talked about what we can do. So I'm going to start over here with Todd. Todd, Talk to me and give me one of the big challenges you see today, because technology's come a long way. We're adapting commercial technology. We can do a lot of things as technologists. What are some of the impediments that you see to continued use or to the growth of this? And I'll ask that question for all of you because you're all very engaged in this. Number one problem that you face with regard to adoption or installation?
Well, one is that every hospital's systems are different. So you have to make sure that you understand the inner workings. And I'll cheat you with the second is the FDA has to learn what AI is. And they do know, but I mean consistency. So every company knows exactly what you're going to be presenting and what technology needs to be presented and what's a letter to file. So
Maybe.
I'd agree about the heterogeneity. I think that's a really critical point as you look at sort of health systems in the States and around the world. The second bit I would say is we mustn't underestimate the incredible behavior shift and change that we're asking a whole workforce to do. And so, not underestimating that I think is essential, because you're asking individuals that have been doing the same thing for decades and decades and decades to suddenly flip and shift to a digital continuum. The good thing is it's happening in our personal life, so hopefully that jump isn't as big when we think about our professional lives. But nonetheless, if you walk into an operating room, it's still pretty traditional, pretty archaic, the way we do things. It's the same way we've been doing things for many, many, many years. So I think that it goes back to the points of behavior shift, championing, finding those early champions and making that change is really essential. And I believe COVID helped catalyze some of that. The silver lining of that is that people have recognized the importance of digital and enabling solutions as well, edge computing and technology and the role it can play, that it's not and or, it's actually they can come together and augment each other. So those would be my two.
Thank you. Daniel?
So I'm going to take a little bit of the Gauss story here and kind of leverage into the use of, as described in that example, consumer hardware. I think what I would actually reframe that as consistency in hardware. One of the challenges that we faced in starting, when I was starting Avail, is that decision of should we go software or hardware and software. We went to the latter for exactly the reason described, because you're actually relying on consistent hardware. You're just buying it at Best Buy. Now, we can't buy ours at Best Buy because we have some different requirements associated with that capability. But from a challenge perspective of being in the operating room, I agree with Nadine's comment and Todd's comment that there's heterogeneity in the operating room. It's not just the operating room, it's also the staff, right? We've heard about the Great Resignation. There's a lot of turnover in staff. To the extent you've got a knowable, easily accessible piece of hardware, like an iPad, in our example, a piece of hardware that we built, that is knowable and easily accessible, you're able to engage that capability live and in the moment and do so at an instant's notice. One of the greater challenges through all of this is, in fact, the hesitancy of the best practices that they've honed over 40 years, as Nadine described. Now you're introducing this whole notion that you don't call Bob or Mary down the hall and ask them to break scrub and come take a look at your case. You're actually pressing a button and accessing them electronically. I'll bet everybody in this room knows that first time they looked at Zoom and they thought, oh, this is a little weird. This is just a little weird. Now imagine you're in the middle of an operation and now you're looking at Zoom. Oh, that's like really weird, right? But it's not so weird anymore. It's actually normal right now. It's normal at the point where it's being done thousands of times a month, thousands of times a week. There's new education that's being enabled by that. And with that kind of capability, you're able to use hardware in the way that they used it at Gauss to enable new capabilities to care for the patient.
And Sid, real quickly, any big impediment that you see? What's the big remaining obstacle?
Yeah, I'll latch onto that last one. I think it's value proposition, and it's demonstrating some sort of operational change or clinical outcome. And this is actually central to Stryker's mission around advanced digital healthcare, which is innovation that empowers clinical outcomes. And we learned this firsthand at a little startup. We had a cool new digital technology, AI. I'll keep saying the word cool until I'm blue in the face. But it took 10 years. It took, I think at the time of our acquisition, we had over 30 peer-reviewed publications. Half of them were independent, many of them looking at outcomes. We had studies with tens of thousands of patients. We had the adoption curve was just incredible. I remember the day I walked this thing into an OR, I said to the surgeon, hey, I have an iPad app and it's going to measure how much blood you lose. What do you think? And the surgeon goes, I don't lose any blood. I'm a pretty good surgeon. So going from there to having, this sort of adoption en masse where we get calls from health systems going, I need a quote for 30 systems. There's a lot that happens between that. And part of it was being very consultative, developing both your commercial sales process and your roadmap so that you could actually get to the right points in the right parts of the hospital to convince them of the early adoption without any evidence, and then to sort of generate evidence as we went on. Ultimately, you have to have some sort of a clinical outcome or a cost avoidance that is demonstrable with your offering. Nobody cares that it's cool or there's digital or there's AI. Again, those are bumper stickers. You should trademark that, Todd.
Well
It's
said.
always about the outcomes and the money and the infrastructure and all of that. Follow the money, and in this case, in the U.S., always you've got to find the financial reason for doing it. Well, I promised I'd leave some time, so I'm going to ask, this is the lightning round, real quick question for each of you. On the scale of 1 to 10, I put this question in the notes. You get a chance to rate where you think the maturity of the OR is. If 0 is not nowhere and 10 is perfection someday down the road, where do you think it is today? And just give me a number, and then I'm going to open up for questions for the audience. And I know this room isn't occupied after this, so I'm sure a number of these folks will want to grab you and ask questions in addition. So, Sid, you get to go first. What's the number? Between 1 and 10.
I'd say 5. But I think it's a huge opportunity. There's just so much to be done, both in the algorithms and both from point solutions to true, ambient intelligence.
All right, Daniel?
I'd say it feels like a 4, but in 5-7 years, it'll be viewed as a 2.
Okay, the opportunities will be much bigger in a few
Yes.
years. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say I'd agree sub 5 around the 4 area. We still have a lot of opportunity and a lot to do.
A lot of competition for you guys coming into the market because it's going to be so huge, right? So, and Todd?
With AI and connectivity, I think it's a 3.
Okay. All right, very good. I'm going to open it up for the audience here. So please announce the question really loudly, and I'll do my best to repeat it. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, in terms of challenges, you guys didn't talk that much about the issue of connectivity in the OR to the extent you're pulling data from all the devices, monitoring, et cetera, that are there. My experience is, particularly coming from a company focused on the ICU to the OR, is years behind in terms of connectivity. So curious how you dealt with that challenge and how you see progress being made or not on that front.
Who wants to tackle that one? Nadine, go
I
ahead.
think it's a super essential point. I mean, for those who have been in OR, you often check your phone in the bars to start to drop because you have to find that one corner where you can call home and check on the kids. So I've been there. I'm sure a lot of you have been there if you've been in an OR. I think the connectivity and the infrastructure is essential as well. And 8 years ago when we set up Proximie, we recognized that bandwidth was a huge limitation in the operating room and a barrier. Even as you started to look at those exciting AR, VR technologies and others, do beautiful things at conference centers, and then when you take them into an operating room, the whole thing just crashes because it's just not set up for it. And so what we decided to do very early on is one of the key features in our technology was to build bandwidth adaptability. So make sure that we could identify areas of bandwidth and adjust the views, the number of views, the crystallite, kind of how great the view is in the 1080, 720, sort of drop it through that and the resolution based on what the environment was. So it's a lot more adaptive to the environment, therefore continues to optimize for the end user. That being said, we also recognize that we needed to be a catalyst in terms of changing that, not just adapting to the SCAD, but actually trying to change it and improve it. So we've been doing a lot of work with companies that are looking at MEC, 5G, edge compute, connectivity, and how do we help bring those into those environments as well? Because ultimately, those telco companies are, they're building great technology, but they're really trying to find that killer value proposition that's going to make it valuable within the hospital, that's going to encourage hospitals to relook at connectivity infrastructure within those environments. So by bringing together great solutions that are meaningful for patient outcomes and codify surgery, it helps them also find a way to get in and push hospitals to improve and optimize that. We still have a way to go, but I can say we've seen a huge improvement over the last few years. And our technology has adapted in the most austere of environments. I mean, we've delivered Proximie on naval ships, in the military fields, in sub-Saharan Africa, in areas where there's barely a 3G connectivity. But equally, I would say flying in from London, I would say that some of our hospitals in the NHS aren't that better from a connectivity perspective either, and I suspect it's probably the same here too. So sometimes we look at the global south and think, oh, it's a problem for that part of the world. It's not really our problem. I can tell you it's a problem everywhere, and we're working really hard looking at that, looking at satellite, Starlink, and other things as well.
But we also, one of the challenges, we always focus on the connectivity with regard to whether it's wireless, wired, connected, but we don't focus as much on standards. I'm an old DICOM survivor, and radiology didn't happen in connected fashion until we defined connection standards physically, but also an interface standard and protocol and all of that. And we suffer because every med device manufacturer out there, and I kind of live in that world, has a different standard, different protocol, different capability. And so that's one of the challenges.
I think the wired also limits you early on. That, you know, when you go into hospital and say, I need to get into up to the wired Ethernet, I mean, that's going to delay you a lot to try and make that change. So we needed to get onto Wi-Fi. We needed to be able to work with other routes that help accelerate adoption.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Selfish startup question. So very interested. You mentioned partnerships with strategics. I think you both mentioned it. How should we be thinking about this as people that have other objectives, but we're clearly trying to create awareness, looking for opportunities for scale, training, things like, how should we think about our partnerships with companies like yours?
Well, I'm going to pitch that one to you as someone who got acquired. So if I can, because I want to keep us moving, go ahead. Or unless you guys want to fight it out. But.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Dan's got a wealth of experience here too, so I don't want to hog the air. I'd say it depends on how you're financed and how you're structured. I think that's a huge part of it. Also depends on the specifics of your business. There are some plays that are more ecosystem plays where the strategics are your customers, and I think in those instances, I'd go wide and be all out for that. Our perspective as a traditional sort of valley-based venture-backed startup was, signal widely what we're doing, cultivate a strong level of interest, and just be super open with the strategics. So we had many conversations that we kept open, and we built meaningful dialogues along the way, and that was really key. With Stryker in specific, it was probably the most impressive group. I'm not just saying this because I wear a Stryker badge now, but it really was a very engaged group of folks that we had conversations for almost 7 years, and on and off. And it's just about the right time when it just made sense for us to really have a conversation that then turned into a more transactional discussion. So we always practice the idea of socializing what we're doing, but we were hesitant to sort of lock in too early with any single group.
And that's one of the questions that every startup needs an answer to, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
David, be selfish. What value do you bring them, and what value do they bring you? If you could answer it on both fronts, it's a good partnership.
One more question. Right back there. Go ahead. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about the first wave of software to hit hospital EHRs. And, the U.S. had a huge issue with interoperability, right? The federal government had to intervene. Now we have standards like FHIR, which unlock the whole era of, population health, care coordination platforms, analytics built on top of that common data. Is the same going to happen in the surgical space and in the AR space? Like, do we lack that interoperability layer? Because I look down the panel, everyone has a different strategy when it comes to interoperability, and it becomes more pronounced when you layer in hardware interoperability as well. So I'm curious if we could talk a little bit about interoperability, because that could potentially unlock a lot of this analytics that we're talking about.
Sure.
I'll throw that one to Daniel because I cut him off on the other one.
No worries. So I think one of the key things, if you spend a bunch of time in an operating room, a lot of it's visual, right? So outside of robotic procedures, a great deal of what happens is visual. At this stage, interoperability more is about pulling video streams and audio streams together. As we move down the pathway of creating increased capability, both robotic and non-robotic in operating rooms, now you're interested in integration in a different way. Interoperability today means accepting any video stream. That's exactly what we've built in our hardware, is to accept any video stream. And we've got mixing capabilities and augmentation capabilities built into our system, because we recognize that so much of of the didactics, if you will, in an operating room are audio and visual. Now let's fast forward from there. You have to have that capability also enable the outside world as well as inside the hospital augmented artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities. That needs to be on a consistent platform. That's frankly one of the key reasons I made the decision, a very expensive one, mind you, to build a network of hardware out into the operating rooms all across the country. We've raised north of $130 million for that purpose, to be able to create that network. And we frankly don't even charge for the hardware. Why? Because we're placing the hardware to enable that capability to be ubiquitous as fast as possible to address the exact question that you just raised.
Sid, you had something you wanted to say real quickly, and then we're gonna close it off.
Yeah, no, the large cap perspective on this is you're absolutely right. There's this movement that's underway. You know, companies like Stryker are all over this as well. At Stryker, we have, I think, north of 85 digitally connectable devices, and we are all about connecting our own devices, which, by the way, start at the back of an ambulance and the sensors on your knee when the patient goes home. So that in and of itself, within like the Marvel universe, if you will, of Stryker, is that itself is a huge opportunity. And then you can sort of start to pull analytics off of that. So if you can start to measure things, you know, at admit, you can start to predict things around the outcome itself. And there's sort of that data piece. And then there's even efforts within the company, there's entire divisions working on connectivity within the OR. So similar to what Dan was sharing, you know, the iSuite that Stryker has out of our endo division, that's a complete integration of the AV feed in the operating room. And I think what gives Stryker a big advantage is its scale and its existing footprint. So there's a lot there to be mined in terms of connecting our own devices and then starting to. But
the challenge with that, of course, is I have a Medtronic environment, I have a Boston Sci environment, I have a Baxter environment. I'll leave it, I'll let it go with that. Please join me in thanking this great panel.